Alright, here's a chilling story for you that will keep you on edge. Imagine a quiet, lonely highway. A dark stretch of road with only the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. I was hauling freight up from Texas, dead of night, the kind of stretch where truckers like me start nodding off behind the wheel if we're not careful. Miles of nothing, no gas stations, no lights, not even any towns to remind you there's still some kind of life out there. Just you, the road, and whatever might be lurking out there in the dark. I'd been at it for nearly 8 hours straight, and the caffeine high from my last truck stop coffee was starting to wear off. That's when I saw it, the faint glow of headlights way back in my rearview mirror. I figured it was another trucker until it kept its distance, matching my speed but never quite catching up. Weird thing was, even with all the curves and bends, I never saw that car get closer or farther. Just a constant glow hanging in the distance, following me at just the right distance to stay out of reach. After a while, my curiosity got the best of me. I turned the lights down on the dashboard, leaned over a bit, trying to get a better look. That's when I realized it wasn't headlights. It wasn't even a car. The lights, they looked like two eyes. I blinked hard, rubbed my face, chalked it up to sleep deprivation. But as the miles rolled on, those twin lights stayed with me, and something in my gut started to twist, every nerve telling me to ignore it. When I stole another glance, I saw something that made my heart stop. There was a figure, something dark and long-limbed, crouching on the road directly behind my truck, keeping pace as if it was gliding, not running. I felt a chill settle over me. This was no sleep-deprived hallucination. Whatever it was real and it was watching me. I pushed down on the gas, but the figure only kept up, gliding faster with impossible ease. My truck started to shake as I forced it faster, the engine groaning with the strain. That's when the thing moved closer, the light or its eyes intensifying. It got so close that I swear I saw its mouth. Just a black hole stretching too wide, teeth sharp and jagged. The worst part was its expression, a kind of twisted, mocking grin, as if it was daring me to go faster, taunting me, playing with me. I flipped the radio on, desperate for some human voice, anything to remind me I wasn't alone, but all I got was static. Even the emergency channel was dead quiet. I was completely isolated, with nothing but that thing following me in the dark. Finally, I saw an exit sign coming up, a small town a few miles off. I didn't hesitate. I took the turn, barreling down the ramp as fast as I could, hoping the lights of the town would be enough to scare it off. I glanced back, and for the first time it wasn't there. I don't remember the name of the town, only that it was small, barely more than a few streets with a single gas station. I pulled in, breathing like I'd just run a marathon, watching the darkness beyond the station for any sign of movement. Nothing. I leaned back in my seat, trying to catch my breath, telling myself it was over. Then, in the silence, I heard something tap against my passenger door. Just once, then twice. Steady, deliberate. I turned slowly, praying I'd see nothing. But there it was, pressed up against the window. The grin was even wider, stretching the corners of its mouth past any kind of human limit. Its eyes, brighter now, seemed almost amused, like it had finally caught me. I threw the truck into gear, tires screeching as I tore out of the gas station. I didn't care if I was speeding or if anyone was around to see me blow past stop signs. I was leaving that thing behind, whatever it took. But as I reached the edge of town, I made the mistake of looking back. In the side mirror, barely visible in the glow of my taillights, it was running after me, faster than before, arms and legs moving in a sick, loping gait. It was laughing, a sound so low I could feel it vibrating through my truck's chassis. I floored it, racing for the highway, praying the open road would somehow save me. But as I merged back on, I saw those lights appear behind me again. It was right back where it had started, never too close, never too far. The creature, whatever it was, had chosen me. And from that night on, every time I hit a long stretch of empty road, those lights would reappear in my mirror, haunting me, reminding me that no matter where I go, it's always out there, watching, waiting, just beyond the edge of the headlights. There's no shaking a sight like that. Every run I made after that night, I'd find myself glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see that thing trailing me down the highway. And sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of those lights. A pair of faint, mocking eyes, always at a distance but never truly gone. But one night, somewhere in Nebraska, things escalated. I'd been driving all night, crossing through endless stretches of cornfields under a pitch-black sky. Out there, with no civilization for miles, It was like the road disappeared into pure darkness. Then, out of nowhere, my truck engine started stuttering. The dashboard lights flickered, and my heart sank. I knew my rig well enough to tell this was no routine problem. Something was wrong. I was forced to pull over to the side of the road. The engine choked and went dead, leaving me in complete silence. I sat there in the dark cab, breath held, ears straining to pick up any sound. I could feel a heavy, oppressive weight settle over me, the way the air grows thick before a storm. Then, through the rearview mirror, I saw them, the two lights. And this time, they were closer than ever before. It wasn't just watching from a distance this time. It was coming toward me, gliding down the highway with a steady, terrifying slowness. I tried to restart the truck, my fingers slipping on the key as I fumbled, but it was dead. My radio crackled, the static warping into something that almost sounded like laughter, low and twisted, like it was savoring my helplessness. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I glanced out my side mirror, and it was there. I finally got a good look at it. A tall, thin figure cloaked in shadows that seemed to twist around it, like it was more shadow than flesh. It moved with a kind of grace, gliding closer and closer. The headlights seemed to make it more real, highlighting its inhuman features, the elongated limbs and the long, gaping mouth with too many teeth. My heartbeat pounded in my chest as I saw it stretch out one of its grotesque arms, the fingers long and skeletal, nearly touching my truck. That mocking grin stretched wider as if it was savoring my fear. I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed the flashlight from my glove compartment. I flicked it on and shone it out the window. The beam hit the creature, and for a split second, it froze, recoiling from the light. Its grin twisted, almost as if in pain. Seeing that reaction, I flicked the flashlight up and down, trying to keep it off me. The creature slithered backward, slipping into the darkness beyond the reach of the beam. I had my weapon, weak as it was, but I knew it wouldn't keep it away forever. With shaking hands, I jumped out of the truck, flashlight still on, and ran to the back, checking the engine, praying it was something I could fix on the spot. My pulse raced as I felt around the cables, but everything looked fine. Then, over my shoulder, I heard it, a low scraping sound, like nails dragging over metal. I spun around, flashlight in hand, and saw it again, now just feet away from me. Its grin stretched wider, and it opened its mouth wider than seemed possible. A smell, something putrid and earthy, hit me, and I gagged. It seemed to laugh, its shoulders heaving, mocking me as it stepped forward again. In a last-ditch effort, I swung the flashlight directly at it, the beam hitting its face dead-on. The creature hissed, recoiling, as though burned. It seemed to dissolve, slipping back into the shadows just as a pair of headlights appeared over the horizon. Another truck was coming my way. I waved frantically, practically jumping in front of it. The driver, a wiry guy with tired eyes and a look of deep worry, slowed to a stop, watching me warily. "You all right, man?" he asked, his eyes darting around me. "Saw your truck back there. Figured you needed help." I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen, so I just nodded, muttering about engine trouble. He offered me a lift to the next town, and without a second thought, I climbed in. As we pulled away, I glanced back at my truck and froze. There it was, standing by the side of the road, watching us leave. And as we drove away, its figure became smaller, the grin still visible, as if promising I hadn't seen the last of it. I kept quiet the whole ride, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My hands shook, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase the image of that grin, those eyes watching me, waiting. The driver, his name was Clint, didn't push for details, but he noticed I was rattled. He shot me a look now and then, and finally he asked, "You see something out there?" His voice was careful, like he already knew the answer. I hesitated, not sure if I should spill, but the words came out anyway. I told him about the lights that had been following me, the thing that looked more shadow than flesh, how it moved, that smell. Clint didn't look at me the whole time I was talking, but his face went pale, and when I was done, he just nodded slowly, like he'd heard it all before. After a while, he finally spoke. There's a name for it. Highway hag. Least that's what us truckers call it. My stomach dropped. You're telling me this is something people know about? Clint took a deep breath, keeping his eyes on the road. Not something most would admit, but yeah, I've heard stories. Not from anyone who's stuck around long enough to really see it up close like you did. Most truckers only ever catch those lights in the distance. Usually, that's enough to scare him off the road a while. I wanted to ask him more, but Clint tightened his grip on the wheel. Don't look at me like I got all the answers, he muttered, almost to himself. But there's a few things you ought to know. You ever notice how truckers die out here? Heart attacks, accidents where they end up running themselves off the road? Think about it. Guys who've been on these roads for decades just drop dead in their cabs. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Some of us think that hag, or whatever it is, gets stronger the more you run from it, Clint said, almost like it feeds off fear. That's why the old-timers used to say, if you see the lights, just keep driving. Don't pull over. Don't look back. He let out a grim laugh. Guess you learned that the hard way. My mind raced, trying to process everything. This thing, it wasn't just some spirit or hallucination. It had rules, patterns. It was real. Clint dropped me off in the next town at a small, rundown motel. Before he left, he gave me one last piece of advice. I don't know what that thing wants, but whatever you do, don't look for it. Just keep your head down, finish your routes, and hope it loses interest. But I couldn't shake it. The motel room felt like a cage, every shadow stretching and flickering in ways that made me jump. I barely slept, and when I finally did, I had nightmares, visions of those headlights, of something waiting just outside my door, grinning, patient. The next morning, I caught a ride back to my rig. I almost expected to find it trashed or even empty, like whatever was hunting me had claimed it as its own. But it was untouched. I did a quick check of the engine and everything seemed fine, like the breakdown the night before had never even happened. I climbed back in the cab, hands sweating, eyes scanning the rearview mirror almost constantly as I started down the road. But as the miles passed, things were normal. No lights, no strange figures, no sense of something lurking. I was starting to believe maybe it really had just been a nightmare. But 2 weeks later, on a run up to Montana, I saw the lights again. They appeared just after sundown, the twin glows flickering in the distance, faint but unmistakable. My heart pounded, but this time I kept my speed steady, fighting the urge to floor it. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, repeating Clint's words in my head. Asterisk, don't pull over. Don't look back, asterisk. I forced myself to stay calm, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. Mile after mile, I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to even glance in the mirrors. But the lights grew closer, inching forward until I could almost feel that mocking grin right behind me. A low hum started to fill the cab like static, vibrating through the seat, the pedals, even the wheel. And then, in a voice that felt like nails scraping down my spine, I heard it whisper, "Keep running. It won't matter." I froze, my foot slipping on the gas for just a second, but enough that the truck slowed. The lights edged closer, almost level with the back of my cab now. I felt a chill creep up my neck, my entire body paralyzed with fear. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the hum stopped, and the lights vanished. I forced myself to keep going, the echo of that voice hanging in the cab like cigarette smoke, refusing to fade. That night, I made it to my destination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever the highway hag was, it wasn't just some ghostly figure on the side of the road. It was something older, darker, something that had chosen me. And no matter how many miles I drove, I had a sick feeling that it would never stop following. After that night, I couldn't shake the dread that followed me everywhere. Every highway felt longer, every mile darker. The open road, once my sanctuary, became a trap I couldn't escape. And worst of all, I knew it was still out there, waiting. A couple of weeks went by without incident, and I started to believe maybe, just maybe, I was in the clear. But that feeling of peace didn't last long. It was one of those pitch-black nights on a long haul through the Rockies. I was winding up a mountain pass, sharp cliffs dropping off on one side, sheer rock walls on the other. It was the kind of road where there's no room for mistakes, no chance to swerve or pull over. Just you, the road, and the drop below. That's when I saw the lights again. They appeared in the rear view, faint but unmistakable, those twin orbs that seemed to carry a malicious intelligence. They matched my speed, keeping just far enough back that I couldn't make out anything else, only those two bright points in the dark. My heart hammered. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself to keep going. I wasn't going to stop. Not this time, but I could feel it inching closer, closing the distance. The hum started up again, faint at first, then growing louder, like static echoing in the cab, vibrating through the wheel, the pedals, even my chest. And then I felt it. A hand. A cold, skeletal hand, brushing across the back of my neck. I jerked, nearly sending the truck off the edge. My heart raced, breath coming in short gasps. But when I reached back, there was nothing. Just the hum and those damn lights. I pushed on, eyes fixed ahead, but then the lights did something new. They split, each one moving out to the sides of the road, almost as if something was stretching out, growing wider, wrapping around me. A deep, guttural voice, like gravel scraping against bone, echoed in the cab. "Why do you run? You know you'll never escape." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. The lights closed in, now moving alongside me, illuminating the cliff edge, making the shadows twist and writhe. They started to drift closer, pressing against the sides of the truck, until I could see them almost touching the windows, inches away from my face. "Look at me," the voice whispered, more insistent now, clawing at my mind. "I know what you fear." My mind raced, desperate for a way out, but there was no way to turn, no place to go. The hum intensified, becoming a cacophony of whispers and growls, all of them taunting, mocking. "Look at me." My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the voice, the hum, even the roar of the engine. I wasn't going to let it control me. I gripped the wheel, teeth clenched, refusing to give in. And then, something changed. The truck jolted, and I heard a horrible scraping sound. A tearing, like metal being twisted, pulled apart. My rearview mirror shattered, glass raining down across the dashboard. In my side mirror, I saw the lights flicker, momentarily dimming. Whatever it was struggling to keep up. I didn't know what had happened, but I floored it, praying my truck had enough power to make it up the rest of the mountain. The engine roared, tires squealing as I pushed the rig harder than I ever had, feeling the entire truck strain with the effort. As I climbed higher, the lights fell further and further behind. The hum died down, replaced by a strange, guttural growl, something that sounded almost angry. I risked one last glance in the mirror, and there, at the edge of my taillights, I saw it. An outline, tall, thin, arms stretching out like it was trying to pull itself forward. Its grin had faded, replaced with a look of pure malice. With one last roar, I made it to the summit and raced down the other side of the mountain. The lights faded completely, swallowed by the darkness behind me. I didn't stop until I reached a truck stop on the edge of town, my hands still shaking as I cut the engine. I stumbled out, taking in deep, gasping breaths, the cold air burning my lungs. I stood there, alone in the silence, trying to make sense of what I'd just been through. The next few nights, I stayed off the road, too rattled to drive. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't going to give up. It was still out there, waiting for me to get back behind the wheel. And someday I know it'll catch up. Weeks went by, and though I tried to convince myself it was over, that I'd left whatever was hunting me somewhere on that mountain road, I knew deep down it was still out there, lurking just beyond the glow of my headlights. Every time I got behind the wheel, that familiar dread crept up my spine, a constant, nagging fear that any moment I'd see those lights again. And then it happened. It was just after midnight on a run through Nevada. I'd been pushing myself, trying to get a few extra miles in before sunrise, when the radio crackled to life. Static at first, faint and distant, then a familiar low hum that made my blood turn to ice. My eyes darted to the rear view, but the road behind me was empty, just an endless stretch of blacktop under a moonless sky. The static grew louder, filling the cab, drowning out the hum of the engine. Then, through the white noise, I heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable. "Why are you still running?" It whispered, dripping with malice, taunting. I slammed the radio off, heart pounding, but the voice persisted, echoing in the back of my mind. "You can't escape me. You never will." The lights appeared then, flickering in the distance, twin orbs glowing like eyes in the dark, piercing through the blackness. This time they were closer, more intense, burning with a strange, sickly yellow glow that seemed almost angry. My instinct was to speed up, to put as much distance between myself and those lights as possible. But I remembered Clint's words, his warning not to run. So I kept my speed steady, knuckles white on the wheel, every nerve screaming at me to gun it, but I didn't. The lights inched closer, until they were right on my tail, just feet from my bumper, casting an eerie glow over the road. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the cab, filling every corner, pressing down on me like a weight. And then, as if it couldn't hold back any longer, the voice spoke again, louder this time, clear and vicious. "Stop running." It wasn't a request. It was a command. Against every instinct, I felt my foot easing off the gas, my mind fogging, muscles going slack as the truck began to slow. The lights pulsed, brighter and brighter, flooding the cab with an unnatural, sickly glow. I fought to keep control, but something was pressing down on me, an invisible force that felt like claws digging into my shoulders, dragging me down, forcing me to submit. Then suddenly, I was no longer in my truck. I was somewhere else. A dark, endless highway stretched out before me, flanked by shadowy figures on either side, their forms twisted and broken, faces locked in expressions of eternal terror. The sky was black, no stars, no moon, just an endless void pressing down on me. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't respond. I was trapped, paralyzed, forced to watch as the figures slowly closed in, their eyes empty, hollow, filled with a despair so deep it was suffocating. And then I saw it, the thing that had been hunting me, standing at the end of the road, waiting. It was taller now, its form more defined, almost human but wrong in every way. Its limbs were too long, its skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame, and its eyes, those eyes glowed with a malevolent hunger, brighter and more intense than before. It grinned, a wide, jagged smile that seemed to stretch across its entire face, teeth sharp and glistening in the darkness. And then, in a voice that echoed through my mind, it spoke. "I've been waiting for you." The figures around me reached out, skeletal hands grasping, pulling, dragging me forward, closer to that twisted, grinning face. I struggled, fighting against their grip, but it was useless. I could feel myself slipping, my strength draining, the darkness closing in. And just as I was about to give in, a light appeared in the distance. Faint, barely a flicker, but enough to catch the creature's attention. Its grin faltered, its eyes narrowing as it turned to look. The figures released their hold, recoiling as the light grew brighter, filling the darkness with a warm, golden glow. I felt a surge of strength, just enough to break free, to wrench myself back from the brink. And then, with a sudden jolt, I was back in my truck, hands on the wheel, the hum fading, the lights gone. I sat there, gasping, drenched in sweat, my hands trembling. The road was empty, the night silent, but I knew it wasn't over. The highway hag was still out there, somewhere, waiting for its next chance. But as I drove away, one thought kept me going. A strange, fleeting hope that whatever that light was, it might be enough to keep the darkness at bay. For now. That night, I made it to my drop-off and back to a rest area without any more signs of the hag. But I knew better than to feel relieved. Even as I parked and tried to sleep in my cab, the terror of that dark highway stayed with me. The next few runs were mercifully quiet. No hum, no whispers, no flicker of those haunting lights. But the calm only made me feel worse, like it was luring me into a false sense of security, waiting for just the right moment to strike again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grin, those eyes, and that twisted, skeletal frame hovering just behind me in the rear view. One night, I stopped at a diner just off the highway. It was a worn-down, greasy spoon kind of place, the type only truckers and locals ever bothered with. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with a cigarette hanging from her lips, looked me over as I ordered coffee, her eyes narrowing like she'd seen my type before. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Han," she said, pouring my coffee with one hand while she held her smoke in the other. I chuckled, but it came out hollow. "Something like that." She gave me a long look, then nodded toward a booth in the back, where an older trucker sat alone, nursing his own cup of coffee. "Talk to Dave. He's been around longer than any of us. Heard a thing or two about these roads." Normally, I'd have just waved her off, but something about the way she said it made me pause. I took my coffee, walked over, and slid into the booth across from the man. He looked up, eyes tired but sharp, sizing me up. "You got something you want to ask?" he grumbled, voice like gravel. I wasn't sure how to start, but eventually, I just came out with it. "I think something's following me." On the highway, for a second, he just stared at me. Then he nodded slowly. "The hag." A chill ran through me. "You know about it?" Dave leaned back, his gaze growing distant. "I've seen her. A long time ago. Most truckers think it's just a myth, a story to keep rookies alert on the road. But some of us know better." He took a long sip of coffee. "She's not like other things. She picks you, and once she's got her sights on you, she don't let go." "What does she want?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Dave's eyes darkened. "Fear, pain. She feeds off it, gets stronger with it. That's why you see her on those lonely stretches, where there's no one else around. She waits until you're alone, vulnerable. Then she comes creeping in." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You ever hear the stories about truckers going missing? Guys who just vanish on the road. No trace, no wreck, nothing." I nodded slowly, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "That's her work," he said, voice grim. "She takes M, feeds off M till there's nothing left, then moves on to the next poor soul. And once she's had a taste of you, she'll keep coming back, over and over, until..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "So, what am I supposed to do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "How do I get rid of her?" He looked at me, sympathy in his eyes. You can't get rid of her. All you can do is hold her off, make her lose interest. Don't give her what she wants. Don't give her fear." Easier said than done. Every instinct I had was telling me to run, to hide, to do anything but face that thing again. But I nodded, trying to convince myself I could handle it. "Another thing," Dave said, his voice turning serious. "She's got her tricks. Illusions, sounds, lights. Don't trust anything strange you see or hear out there. If you see her, don't look directly at her. And no matter what you hear, don't stop." I left the diner that night feeling like I'd been handed a death sentence. But Dave's words stuck with me. Don't give her what she wants. I clung to that thought like a lifeline, repeating it to myself over and over as I climbed back into my rig and hit the road again. The next night, I was driving through the desert, nothing but sand and scrub stretching out in every direction. The air so still and quiet it was like the world had stopped. I felt a prickling on the back of my neck, that sixth sense telling me something was coming. And then, in the distance, I saw them, those two pale lights, flickering just at the edge of my sight. My heart pounded, every nerve screaming at me to look, to turn and see if it was her. But I forced myself to keep my eyes forward, my grip on the wheel steady, my speed constant. The lights grew brighter, closer, until they were hovering right at the edge of my mirrors, taunting me. I could feel her presence, like a weight pressing down on my shoulders, her gaze burning into me. A faint hum filled the cab, and then, clear as day, I heard my mother's voice. "Help me," she whispered, her voice trembling, laced with fear. "Please, help me." My chest tightened, memories flooding back. Memories of her last days in the hospital, her frail voice calling out for me, the guilt of not being there when she passed. I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to turn around, to see if it was really her. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'm so scared." The pain was unbearable, a knife twisting in my gut. But then I remembered Dave's words. "Don't trust anything strange you see or hear out there." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, letting the voice wash over me without giving in. Slowly, the voice faded, replaced by a low, frustrated growl, like a wounded animal retreating. The lights dimmed, pulling back, fading into the darkness. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. I had resisted her, denied her the fear she craved, but I knew it wouldn't be the last time. She'd be back, stronger, more cunning, waiting for that one moment of weakness. As I drove on, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing there, her twisted grin mocking me. But there was only the empty road, stretching out into the night. The highway hag hadn't won. Not yet. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The days blurred together after that night, but I could feel something in me fraying, like a piece of thread winding tighter and tighter, ready to snap. Even when I wasn't on the road, I was haunted by the memory of her voice, that terrible, helpless cry from the darkness. It was so real, like she was still out there somewhere, suffering, waiting for me to come to her. And the hag knew it. She was using my memories, digging into my mind, unearthing everything I'd buried long ago just to keep myself sane. Every time I got back behind the wheel, I knew it was only a matter of time before she'd come for me again. 2 weeks later, in the middle of a long stretch of highway in Wyoming, I finally lost my resolve. I was crossing through a valley, the mountains looming in the distance, when the truck's lights began to flicker. I gripped the wheel, my pulse spiking, dread creeping into my gut. I told myself it was just the truck, a power issue maybe, or a short in the wiring. But then the lights went out completely, plunging me into darkness. For a split second, I was floating in silence, in total, absolute blackness. And then the lights flicked back on, revealing her in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching as it ground to a halt. She was standing there, right in my headlights, her body twisted and stretched, limbs too long, skin pulled tight over jagged bones. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, unblinking, staring directly into me. And that grin, that awful, soul-crushing grin, stretched across her face. She took a step forward, her movements slow, deliberate, as if savoring every second of my terror. I was paralyzed, hands locked on the wheel, breath caught in my throat. I knew I should look away, keep driving, anything but look at her, but it was like she had rooted me to the spot, pulling me deeper into her gaze. Then she raised a hand, a bony, clawed finger, and pointed to the passenger door. I don't know why I did it, but something in me moved on its own. I reached over, my hand trembling as I unlocked the door. The handle turned with a sickening creak, and the door swung open, inviting her inside. She didn't climb in, though. Instead, she stood there, her mouth opening wider and wider, an impossible blackness filling the space where her throat should be. And from that darkness, I heard voices, dozens, maybe hundreds of voices, all of them pleading, crying, begging for release. Familiar voices, people I'd known, faces I'd buried deep in my memory, all calling out to me, accusing me, blaming me. I heard my father, my best friend from high school, even an old girlfriend I'd never properly said goodbye to. And through it all, weaving between the cries, was my mother's voice, soft, desperate. "Help me," she whispered. "Please, don't leave me here." Something inside me snapped. I leaned forward, hands shaking, staring into that black void, feeling the pull, that endless chasm of darkness, beckoning me. Promised peace, escape, freedom from the fear that had taken over my life. All I had to do was give in, let myself go, and I could finally be free. But then, somewhere in the depths of that darkness, I saw a glimmer of light. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a tiny spark against the overwhelming void. But it was enough. I tore my gaze away from her, slamming the door shut, locking it, forcing myself back into the driver's seat. My heart pounded, adrenaline surging as I pressed down on the gas, my mind screaming at me to move, to get away from her. The truck lurched forward, tires squealing as I barreled down the highway, the hag's twisted figure fading in the rearview mirror. But even as I left her behind, I knew she was still with me, her presence lingering like a shadow, a stain that would never wash away. That light I'd seen, it was like the one I'd seen before, the one that had saved me in the darkness. It was weak, barely enough to pierce the blackness, but it was there. It had saved me once, and maybe, just maybe, it could save me again. I kept driving, refusing to slow down, refusing to look back. But as I pressed on, mile after mile, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that the hag would return, stronger, more relentless, until she'd claimed what she wanted. But this time, I wasn't just going to sit back and let her win. Whatever that light was, whatever small glimmer of hope I'd seen, I was going to find it. I was going to hold onto it with everything I had. And maybe, if I was lucky, it would be enough to finally escape the darkness that had taken over my life. Because if it wasn't, then I knew that one day, I'd find myself back on that endless, empty highway, trapped in that suffocating darkness, with the hag's grin waiting to welcome me home. I wish I could say things got easier after that the hag finally backed off, or that I found some way to keep her at bay. But the truth was, every mile felt heavier. Every empty road felt like a trap set just for me. I tried to hang on to that memory of light, that faint glimmer that had saved me in the darkness. But with every passing day, it seemed to grow dimmer, like it was slipping out of reach. A month later, I took another night run, this time through a winding back road in Oregon, somewhere so remote it didn't even show up on my GPS. I figured the isolation might help clear my head, that the silence would help me shake the fear. But deep down, I knew she was waiting, and I knew she wouldn't give up. About an hour in, the road narrowed, winding through thick trees that cast shadows across my headlights. The night was darker than usual, the sky swallowed up by heavy clouds, no stars or moon to light my way. My headlights barely cut through the gloom, and every shadow seemed to pulse, moving closer, as if the darkness itself was alive. And then, there it was again, that low, familiar hum creeping through the radio, crawling up my spine, making every hair on my neck stand on end. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers went numb. The hum grew louder, more insistent, filling the cab until it was all I could hear. I knew what was coming. She was here, waiting, watching. But I forced myself to keep driving, repeating Dave's words in my head like a mantra. Asterisk, don't look. Don't give her what she wants, asterisk. The hum rose to a crescendo, and then, through the static, I heard my father's voice, harsh, angry. Still running? He sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. You've always been a coward. I gritted my teeth, refusing to respond, refusing to acknowledge him. But he continued, his voice echoing through the cab. You left us, you know that, he said, his voice growing softer, more venomous. You left your family, left your mother to die alone. Just like you leave everyone. My chest tightened, anger and guilt boiling inside me. But I fought it down, keeping my eyes on the road. This wasn't real. This was the hag's trick. But still, the words cut deep, each one a reminder of every failure, every regret. Then, my father's voice faded, replaced by another. A young woman, her voice filled with betrayal. Why did you leave me? She asked, her voice trembling. It was my high school girlfriend, the one I'd promised the world to, only to walk away when things got tough. I loved you? Didn't that mean anything? I bit down hard, jaw clenched, refusing to let the emotions take hold. It was just another illusion, another attempt to wear me down, to feed off my fear and guilt. But the voices kept coming, one after another, each one dredging up memories I'd buried long ago. My best friend from college, the one who'd been there through everything, his voice filled with disappointment. You left us, man, just packed up and left. You never even said goodbye. My mother's voice, so soft and broken it made my heart twist. "I needed you, honey. I needed you, and you weren't there." They came faster, piling up, overlapping until I couldn't tell one voice from another. A cacophony of pain and accusation that filled the cab, drowning out my thoughts, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. "Stop," I whispered, voice shaking, my hands trembling on the wheel. "Please stop." The voices fell silent, leaving only the hum, that low, steady drone that seemed to seep into my bones. And then, in the silence, I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the road, her figure framed by the headlights, her eyes burning with that unnatural light. Her grin stretched wider than ever before. She took a step forward, then another, her movements slow, predatory, savoring the moment. I forced myself to look away, to keep my eyes on the road, to keep driving. But it was no use. She was everywhere, her face appearing in the rearview mirror, her hands clawing at the windows, her voice whispering in my ear. "You can't run forever," she murmured, her voice soft, almost gentle. "You can't hide from what you are." My resolve cracked. For a split second, I glanced in the mirror, my gaze meeting hers, and in that instant, I felt something cold and dark wrap around my mind, pulling me down, deeper into the darkness. The road disappeared, replaced by an endless void, a black expanse that stretched out in every direction. I was standing there, alone, the air thick with the scent of decay, of something old and rotting. And then I saw them, the shadows, the twisted, broken figures of the people I'd lost, the ones I'd failed. They reached out to me, their hands grasping, pulling, dragging me deeper into the void, their faces contorted with pain, with anger, with betrayal. "Help us," they whispered, their voices echoing in the darkness. "Why did you leave us?" I tried to pull away, to break free, but their grip was too strong. I was sinking, drowning in their pain, their anger, their despair. And through it all, I felt her presence, looming over me, her grin widening, her laughter filling the void. Then, in the depths of that darkness, I saw it again. That faint glimmer of light, just a spark, barely visible, but enough to pierce the shadows. I reached for it, clawing, fighting, refusing to let go. And slowly, the darkness began to fade, the figures releasing their grip, their voices fading into silence. I was back in the cab, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel, my heart racing. The road stretched out ahead, empty, silent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. She'd nearly won. I'd felt her claws, her grip tightening around me, dragging me down. And I knew the next time she wouldn't let go. I didn't know how long I could keep fighting, how many more nights I could spend on these empty roads, running from a creature that seemed to know my every weakness, my every fear. But I had no choice. She was still out there, somewhere, waiting for the moment I'd slip. And the worst part? I was starting to believe she was right, that maybe, no matter how far I drove, how fast I ran, I could never truly escape. Because deep down, in the darkest corner of my mind, a part of me knew I'd been hers all along. The days blurred into nights, and every road felt like a final stretch, as if the hag herself was guiding me somewhere, pulling me to the edge, to an end I couldn't avoid. Every dark highway twisted, her presence always lingering just out of sight, her voice threading through the silence, whispering memories, regrets, things I tried to forget. I was nearing my breaking point, and deep down, I knew she was waiting for it. One night, I found myself on a narrow, winding stretch of road deep in the mountains, somewhere out in Colorado. There wasn't a soul around, just towering pines casting shadows across the road, the branches twisting like hands reaching down from above. The sky was overcast, swallowing any moonlight, and it was as dark as the inside of a tomb. And then, like clockwork, the hum started. It crept through the speakers, low and constant, growing louder until I could feel it vibrating through the steering wheel, through my bones, filling every corner of the cab. My heartbeat quickened, and I forced myself to keep driving, to focus on the road. But then the lights appeared, those same eerie twin orbs, glowing in the darkness just behind me. This time, they didn't keep their distance. They surged forward, closing in until they were almost level with my windows, casting an unnatural light over the inside of the cab. I could feel the heat of it, a burning, oppressive presence pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. And then, I heard her voice, clear and sharp, slicing through the hum. "You can't run anymore," she whispered, her tone dripping with malice, yet laced with something almost tender. "It's time to come home." A cold shiver ran down my spine, and before I knew it, my foot was easing off the gas. It was as if she had taken control, guiding my movements, pulling me closer to her. The truck slowed, coasting along the empty road, and I felt myself slipping, my grip on reality loosening. But then I saw it. A faint, golden light ahead, cutting through the darkness, warm and steady. That same glimmer I'd seen before, a beacon against the shadows. My heart surged with a burst of hope, and I forced myself to focus on that light, to fight against the pull of the hag's voice. "No," I whispered, my voice hoarse but resolute. "Not this time." I pressed down on the gas, my eyes locked on the light ahead, refusing to look in the mirrors, refusing to give in to her voice. The truck lurched forward, the hum growing louder, the lights flashing and swirling in the mirrors, as if she was desperate to keep me from reaching that light. "You're mine," she shrieked, her voice warping into a furious growl, a sound that was barely human. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, stronger than anything I'd felt before, but I clung to the light, pushing forward, ignoring the pain, the voices, the memories clawing at my mind. The light grew brighter, filling the road, washing over the cab like a wave of warmth, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the fear start to slip away. The weight lifted, the hum faded, and the lights in the mirrors dimmed, retreating into the shadows. As I reached the source of the light, I saw what it was. A small, weathered chapel nestled between the trees, its stained glass windows glowing with a soft, golden light. It was old, almost ancient, the kind of place that seemed forgotten by time. But it radiated a sense of peace, a calm that seeped into my bones, grounding me, steadying my mind. I pulled the truck to a stop in front of the chapel, and for the first time in months, I felt safe. The silence was complete, the air still, and I knew, somehow, I had found a sanctuary, a place where the hag couldn't reach me. I climbed out of the truck, my legs weak, my body heavy with exhaustion, and approached the chapel doors. They opened with a soft creak, and inside, the space was small and simple. A single row of wooden pews facing an altar lit by candles. The light was warm, inviting, and as I stepped inside, I felt something in me ease, the fear and tension melting away. I sat down on one of the pews, my head in my hands, letting the silence wash over me. For the first time in so long, I felt free, unburdened, as if I'd left the darkness behind. The hag's voice, her presence, her claws, they were gone, left outside in the night. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally looked up, the first light of dawn was spilling through the stained glass, casting a soft glow over the chapel. The darkness had lifted, and with it, the weight I'd been carrying for so long. As I stepped back outside, I felt a strange sense of peace, a calm I hadn't felt in years. The road stretched out before me, bathed in the morning light, and I knew that, somehow, I'd been given a second chance. The hag was gone. I don't know if she was banished, or if she'd just given up, but I knew she wouldn't be coming back. The fear, the darkness, they had no power here, not anymore. I climbed back into my truck, took one last look at the chapel, and started the engine. The road stretched out before me, endless and open, filled with light. And as I drove away, leaving the darkness behind, I knew that I'd finally escaped. For now, anyway.